In the cold, mud-choked trenches of the Great War, where death was as constant as the ever-present stench of blood and gunpowder, Private William Byrd, a seasoned Canadian soldier, found sleep a distant memory, his mind battered by the relentless sounds of artillery and the gnawing anxiety of the living nightmare that stretched endlessly around him. Yet as exhaustion began to pull him toward unconsciousness, an impossible figure emerged from the darkness. His brother Steve, long dead in battle. Over 2 years prior, standing before him with an unsettlingly warm hand, beckoning him silently to follow, and despite William's trembling disbelief, he obeyed, navigating the winding, cratered trenches behind his spectral brother, who moved with a rigidity and purpose that defied the laws of life and death, until the eerie procession ended at a familiar dugout, now obliterated, scattered with the mangled remnants of his comrades, the realization crashing upon him that Steve had somehow guided him from imminent death, leaving William alone in a world suddenly quiet, yet haunted, questioning the nature of reality, wondering if this visitation was a hallucination born of sleep deprivation or something far more supernatural. For the warmth of his brother's hand and the clear image of his face imprinted upon William's memory would remain indelibly. A chilling reminder that even amidst the indiscriminate carnage of war, forces beyond understanding could intervene, shaping destiny in ways both comforting and terrifying, leaving the soldier to grapple with fear, gratitude, and the unfathomable mystery of life beyond the battlefield. In the aftermath of a fierce skirmish near a shattered town in northern France, where the relentless smoke of artillery fire and the acrid scent of gunpowder mingled with the moans of the wounded, 2 exhausted British soldiers, Private Tommy and Corporal Alistair, stumbled across a surreal and terrifying vision that seemed to defy the natural order. A lone woman standing motionless amid the ruins, her vibrant blue skirt and bonnet stark against the gray devastation around her, her weathered face and tired, unblinking eyes fixed directly upon them as if she could pierce the veil between life and death. Unmoved by the chaos of the battle raging on all sides, while the men instinctively raised their weapons and called for her to move, the woman remained rooted to the spot, her presence arresting even the enemy, who momentarily ceased firing. And though Tommy's comrades tried to pull him back to safety, he stepped forward in a trance-like state, helmet in hand, and whispered the words that would haunt the surviving soldiers forever. "That's my mother. I think she's come for me," before a sudden blast claimed him, leaving his body sprawled across the scarred earth, while the mysterious woman vanished as if carried away by the creeping haze, leaving behind only questions and a sense of profound, otherworldly intervention, as the men struggled to reconcile the surreal vision with the harsh reality of warfare, wondering if it was a ghost, an omen, or some fragment of fate made manifest. And amidst the ruins and dying embers of the battlefield, the surviving soldiers felt the weight of superstition and the thin, fragile line between life and death pressed down upon them. A reminder that in war, the unknown often reaches into the living world, and that beyond the shells, the mud, and the screams, forces unseen may be quietly guiding, warning, or claiming those who tread too close to death's door, leaving those left behind to wrestle with the lingering chill of the impossible, the haunting echo of loss, and the ever-present certainty that, in the trenches of the Great War, the veil between the living and the dead was thinner than anyone dared to imagine, and that what was witnessed could not be explained by ordinary reason, only felt, feared, and remembered, a spectral reminder of the horrors, the fragility, and the mysterious powers at work in a world torn apart by relentless violence, where soldiers found themselves walking between life and the beyond, ever haunted by visions both comforting and terrifying, carrying forward the silent warnings of those who had come before them. As the relentless artillery fire subsided into a grim, echoing silence, Corporal Albert Davy of the 1st Australian Tunnelling Company felt an unusual heaviness pressing upon him, a premonition that weighed more than the mud and grime of the trenches ever could. For weeks he had been battling a sense of dread that no camaraderie, or laughter could lift. The war-worn earth around him a constant reminder of mortality and the fragile line between life and death. And though Davy had faced collapsing tunnels, suffocating smoke, and the ever-present threat of enemy detection beneath no man's land, nothing in his 2 years of service had prepared him for the certainty that today his fate was to be decided. He approached his commanding officer, Captain Oliver Holmes Woodward, and in a voice steady yet tinged with quiet desperation, requested that his personal effects be entrusted to his wife should the unthinkable occur, explaining that he felt with absolute conviction that his life would end before nightfall. And though the captain tried to reassure him, dismissing it as nerves common to soldiers before a major operation, Davy's calm yet unwavering demeanor left no room for doubt. His eyes, usually bright with determination, now reflected a solemn acceptance of mortality. And as he marched with the infantry towards the Somme Canal under a gray, oppressive sky, the camaraderie of his fellow soldiers and the raucous encouragement of the officers did little to quell the gnawing certainty inside him. For with each step he felt the subtle pull of destiny, the invisible hand of fate guiding him forward. And as dawn broke over the shattered landscape, a sudden shell struck the line where he and his men waited, and Corporal Davy, as steadfast in his final moments as he had been throughout the war, was killed instantly, his body a silent testament to courage and the inevitability he had foreseen, leaving those who witnessed his premonition and ultimate sacrifice grappling with awe and disbelief, pondering the inexplicable connection between a soldier's intuition and the cruel machinations of war, as letters and diaries later revealed that many men of the Great War experienced such uncanny foreshadowing, spectral warnings, and chilling premonitions, a shadowy intersection of superstition, survival instinct, and the incomprehensible forces at work amidst the mud and chaos, leaving a haunting impression that in the trenches where life and death danced in endless rhythm, the unseen world constantly reached out to touch the living, to warn, to guide, or to claim, and that those who survived bore not only the scars of combat, but the heavy, surreal weight of knowing that their lives have been spared by forces beyond understanding, leaving Corporal Davy's story echoing as both tragedy and mystical testament to the thin, permeable boundary between life, death, and the unknown in the heart of war. In the dense fog and ceaseless chaos of the front lines, where mud swallowed boots and the cries of the wounded mingled with the deafening roar of artillery, soldiers clung to superstition and signs as desperately as they clung to life itself. And among them, Private William Byrd and his comrades had come to notice that death often announced itself in ways subtle and terrifying, with premonitions that sent a chill through even the most hardened hearts. For weeks on end, letters and diaries documented strange occurrences, a sudden, inexplicable feeling of impending doom, a fleeting shadow in the periphery of vision, or the unearthly warmth of a hand not belonging to the living. And though many dismissed such moments as fatigue-induced hallucinations, for those who experienced them, the warnings were undeniable, guiding movements, influencing decisions, and in some cases, saving lives. As soldiers reported glimpses of fallen comrades appearing just long enough to avert disaster or vanish before their eyes, leaving them shaken but alive. And one evening, amidst the shattered remains of a bombed-out village, a weary group of men huddled in their trench were startled by a spectral figure moving silently through the smoke, a soldier who had been killed months prior, guiding them away from a sudden collapse of the trench wall caused by the nearby shelling. His ghostly presence, both comforting and horrifying, as they later recounted the experience with a mixture of awe and disbelief, acknowledging that the horrors of war extended beyond the physical, seeping into realms unseen. For in the Great War, the battlefield was not merely a place of mud, blood, and metal, but a liminal space where life and death intertwined, where fate and the supernatural whispered warnings to those perceptive enough to heed them. And as night fell and the men lay exhausted, contemplating the fragile thread between survival and demise, they realized that the war had taught them to see, beyond the immediate chaos, to sense the invisible currents that determined who would live and who would die, and in doing so, had exposed them to a world of omens, premonitions, and spectral guardians, leaving them with a haunting awareness that while the enemy wielded guns and shells, other forces, ghosts of fallen brothers, ancestral spirits, or something beyond comprehension, moved silently among the trenches, influencing the living, and that survival was as much about recognizing these ethereal interventions as it was about courage, skill, and luck, and that each day, as dawn broke over the shattered earth, soldiers carried the dual burden of facing tangible death and navigating the mysterious, unseen hands that occasionally intervened, guiding some to safety, condemning others, and leaving the living to reconcile the inexplicable with the relentless reality of a war that knew no bounds. Amid the shattered remains of the battlefield, where the earth had been churned into a grotesque landscape of craters, mud, and the scattered remnants of men and material, the soldiers of the Great War moved like ghosts themselves, haunted not only by what they had seen and done, but by the knowledge that death lingered invisibly at every step. And it was during one particularly grueling night patrol that Private James Hawthorne, a young British rifleman, encountered an experience that would forever etch itself into his memory. As he navigated the treacherous trench lines under a thick curtain of smoke and darkness, he saw, just beyond the flickering light of a distant flare, a group of his fallen comrades, their forms luminous yet impossibly corporeal, beckoning him away from a section of the trench that, moments later, collapsed under the impact of an unseen shell, saving his life in a moment of uncanny prescience. And though he could not explain the apparition's sudden appearance, the soldiers later confirmed that the collapse had claimed the lives of men not so fortunate, leaving James to wrestle with the certainty that the supernatural had intervened in his survival. And in the days that followed, he became increasingly attuned to such signs, noting with both fear and gratitude the subtle premonitions that arose before major offensives, the inexplicable chills that ran down his spine, and the quiet whispers that seemed to echo from nowhere, urging caution or swift movement. And while some of his comrades scoffed at these tales, attributing them to stress, fatigue, or imagination, others nodded in solemn agreement, having experienced their own inexplicable encounters with the spirits of the fallen. For in the trenches, where death was both intimate and omnipresent, the boundary between the living and the dead was fluid, and the men learned to respect, fear, and occasionally rely upon the invisible forces that guided them through mortal danger, realizing that survival was never solely determined by skill, firepower, or luck, but by a mysterious confluence of courage and the unseen hands of fate. And as James wrote in his diary, the war had become a realm not only of bullets and shells, but of ghosts, premonitions, and spectral guidance, leaving him both humbled and haunted, aware that the men who had come before, and those who would inevitably follow, were part of a continuum where life and death were constantly negotiating, and that the true terror of the Great War was not only its violence, but the knowledge that the lines separating existence from the beyond could be crossed, touched, and in rare, miraculous moments, altered by those who had already passed, reminding the living that even in the abyss of human conflict, the mysterious and supernatural were never far behind, silently watching, guiding, and shaping the destinies of those who survived its relentless cruelty. In the waning days of the Great War, as the first rays of dawn pierced the dense fog that clung to the battered landscapes of northern France and Belgium, the soldiers of the Allied forces moved cautiously across the scarred earth, their boots sinking in a mud that seemed to pull them closer to the memories of comrades long dead. And among them, Sergeant Thomas Gallagher, a grizzled veteran of countless offensives, felt the familiar chill of premonition descend upon him, a sensation he had come to recognize with uncanny precision over years of bloodshed. For decades-old superstitions and whispered tales of spectral sightings had now become a survival tool as much as a psychological burden. And on this fateful morning, as his unit advanced toward the ruins of a once thriving village, Thomas's gaze fell upon a figure standing atop the rubble, a woman draped in tattered garments that shimmered faintly in the dawn light. Her face etched with sorrow and an impossible awareness, staring directly at him as if she bore witness to the countless lives lost and the horrors yet to come. And though the chaos of battle swirled around them, explosions, gunfire, and the anguished cries of the wounded, the apparition remained untouched, untouchable, her presence commanding and strangely protective. And as Thomas hesitated, rooted in a mixture of fear, awe, and inexplicable trust, a shell burst mere yard from where his instincts had directed him, tearing apart the ground he had been about to step upon, leaving him unharmed yet trembling with the realization that the ghostly figure had guided him from imminent death. And in the silence that followed, he noted the unnatural stillness in the air, the way the haze seemed to carry whispers of fallen comrades, the way the unseen forces of the battlefield had intertwined with fate itself to spare him, leaving him to contemplate the mysterious rules of a world he could not fully understand. And as the unit regrouped, sharing their experiences with hushed voices, Thomas understood that the war had become a conduit for forces beyond comprehension, that ghosts, omens, and spectral warnings were neither rare nor accidental, and that the line between life and death had blurred into a realm where intuition, faith, and unseen intervention dictated survival. A lesson written not in textbooks, but in the diaries, letters, and memories of those who had walked the trenches, fought, and survived to tell of a reality where courage alone was not enough, where the living were guided by the unseen, and where the Great War was as much a spiritual crucible as a battlefield of mud, blood, and fire, leaving soldiers like Thomas haunted, grateful, and forever aware that death often whispered warnings. And sometimes, those warnings came in the form of spectral guardians whose hands were warm, their presence undeniable, and their purpose unfathomable, shaping the destinies of those who dared to tread between life and the beyond. As the guns of the Great War finally fell silent and the shattered landscape began to settle into an uneasy stillness, the soldiers who had survived the relentless carnage found themselves haunted not only by the memories of battle, but by the inexplicable and often terrifying visions that had accompanied them through the mud, blood, and chaos. And among these men, William Byrd reflected on the countless moments when the veil between life and death had seemed to lift, revealing glimpses of fallen comrades, spectral figures, and premonitions that guided, warned, or sometimes condemned. For over 2 years, he had witnessed friends die, entire dugouts obliterated, and trenches collapse. Yet time and again, the touch of a hand long gone, the ghostly face of a brother, or the sudden appearance of a figure clothed in impossible vibrancy had steered him away from certain death, leaving him both grateful and unsettled. And as the war drew to a close, he began to piece together the strange tapestry of survival and fate, understanding that the battlefield had been more than earth and artillery. It had been a threshold where reality and the supernatural intersected, where intuition and courage intertwined with forces beyond comprehension. And though historians and civilians might dismiss such occurrences as coincidence, hallucination, or superstition, the diaries, letters, and memoirs of men like William, Tommy, James, and Thomas bore witness to a pattern that could not be ignored. A pattern where the living and the dead danced in a silent, eternal rhythm across the mud-streaked terrain. And as William wandered through the now-quiet fields, reflecting on the faces of those who had appeared to him in moments of peril, he understood that the war had not only tested physical courage, but had forced men to confront the unknown, the thin veil separating existence from the beyond, and that the true legacy of the Great War was as much spiritual as it was historical, for in every trench, every crumbling dugout, and every smoke-filled night, soldiers had glimpsed the impossible, had felt the warmth of ghostly hands, had heard whispers of warning carried on the wind, and had survived by obeying instincts that defied reason. And though over a century had passed since the last shots were fired, these stories persisted, passed down in letters, memoirs, and recollections. A haunting testament that in the crucible of war, life and death were intertwined with forces unseen, leaving those who lived to tell the tale with a profound understanding that the world was far stranger, more mysterious, and infinitely more supernatural than any history book could ever reveal, a revelation that haunted, inspired, and reminded them that even in the face of humanity's most devastating conflicts, the unseen might intervene, guide, and bear witness to the courage, the fear, and the enduring spirit of men who walked the thin line between life and the afterlife.